Hello, welcome. Thanks for being here. In this video, we're going to talk about training, fat loss, body composition, and what kind of training seems to be best now for these kind of goals. There was a brand new paper, a systematic review with meta-analysis published in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition about 2 weeks ago at this point, I believe, that looked at the lifting weights versus cardio versus lifting weights and cardio within a same overall training program, and fat loss and body composition as their outcomes. The results of this paper, I think, might surprise some and can be quite practical. So with that in mind, broadly speaking, the plan for this video is to discuss the prerequisite conditions required for weight loss to occur of any kind. We'll talk about the difference between weight loss versus fat loss, talk about the rationale for why endurance training or cardio is thought to be beneficial for fat loss, same thing for strength training. We'll talk about what the findings of this new paper are. And then finally, we will talk about what is the practical take-homes of all this information are for you. So again, I wanted to start with this because I thought it made a good, quick little prerequisite to make everything else make a bit more sense. So briefly, weight loss of any kind will occur when a person is in a deficit of calories. Now, a calorie is just a unit of measurement for energy, the same way that an inch is a unit of measurement for distance. Calories come in through food and drink, and calories go out through exercise, walking to the grocery store, your heart beating, thinking, breathing, digesting food, and many other things. Now, a calorie deficit is when the number of calories that come in through food is less than the number of calories that your body burns in a day. So in other words, there are essential functions that your body needs to do, such as keep you alive, that it needs energy to do, and it's not getting that energy through food. So it must turn to its own stores of energy to fuel that, because the alternative is dying, and that's not generally very good. And conversely, if in a day you eat more calories than your body burns in a day, then those extra calories will be stored for later during periods where you don't have access to food, and you can use that for fuel later on. Now, do keep in mind, this is a very gross oversimplification of the idea of energy balance, or calories in, calories out. There are thousands of factors that influence both calories in and calories out, and it sounds simple at face value, but it really does become quite complex when you get into the weeds of it all. Furthermore, these changes don't happen really on a day-to-day basis. They happen over weeks, months, years, etc. So just keep that all in mind with the information that I just put forward. Now, a calorie deficit, as I have just outlined, will result in weight loss of any kind, but weight loss is different than fat loss. Weight loss obviously refers to the loss of weight, but that could be of any kind of weight. Fat loss, as the name implies, refers to when that weight loss is body fat specifically, which is the goal. And in my view, and what you'll see most credible sources say, that the sort of things you got to do to make sure the weight you lose is fat specifically is resistance training, which just means strength training in other words, because that kind of tells your body to hold on to the muscle as the weight is lost, and therefore it will have to choose fat as its source of energy. Sufficient protein intake, so your body has the protein to maintain that muscle, because typically that's the goal, to maintain muscle as you lose fat. The magnitude of the calorie deficit, so if you go into a calorie deficit of, let's say, 1,000 calories below what your body is burning in a day, your body might not be able to get the energy it needs from fat specifically fast enough, so it will have to turn to other sources of energy like muscle to fuel that. So typically, the faster someone loses weight, the more likely the weight they're losing, it could be muscle, and slower weight loss is likely to lead to better results and fat loss specifically. And then finally, sleep hygiene, because there is some evidence to say that the better you sleep, the more able your body is to use fat for fuel specifically, and the worse you sleep, the more unable, for lack of a better word, it is to use fat specifically, so we'll have to use other things. But nevertheless, the overarching point that I want to make with this section of the video is that, one, calorie deficit is required for weight loss specifically, and these factors here are required for fat loss specifically within the context of a calorie deficit. Now, in regard to exercise during a fat loss period, there are two primary rationales for both strength training and cardio. Now, you might hear me use resistance training, strength training, weightlifting. Those can all be considered synonymous. And similarly, I may use endurance training, cardiovascular training, aerobic training. Those can also be seen as synonymous. So the two primary benefits you might seek to gain from strength training during a fat loss period is, one, it will tell your body not to lose muscle. It won't necessarily tell your body to lose fat specifically, but if your body has no use for the muscle mass, it's not going to keep the muscle mass. So it tells your body, hey, we're using this, don't lose it. Secondly, muscle is considered metabolically active, meaning that it burns calories at rest. So by extension, the more muscle mass you have, the more calories your body will burn just sitting on the couch, for example. Now, the amount of calories that you burn extra, per pound of muscle mass is often exaggerated by people online. The best data seems to suggest that somewhere between 6 to 10 calories extra per day per pound of muscle mass is what you'll get. So let's say you put on 10 pounds of muscle, you'll burn an extra 60 to 100 calories per day. If you put on 20 pounds of muscle, you'll put on 120 to 200 calories extra per day. Now, 10 to 20 pounds of muscle is a lot of freaking muscle. It's not something you're going to do in a short amount of time. We're talking probably years for most people. However, really the idea is for you to exercise for the rest of your life, honestly. It's not like you exercise for a couple months and you're good for life. So if you view it through that lens, from your starting point, wherever that may be, it is likely that you will gain 10 to 20 pounds at some point over the course of your life if you maintain the habit. So it is worth bringing up, but it is also just worth keeping in context what actual benefit you're getting and how quickly you're likely to get that benefit. So again, there are two primary rationales for why you might seek to do cardio during a fat loss period. One of which is that you just burn more calories per unit of time exercising. So let's say you do a 60-minute run versus a 60-minute strength training workout. During that run, you might burn 400 to 800 calories, depending on what your pace is. During the lift, you might burn 100 to 200 to 400-ish. And again, it depends on what the lift actually looks like. But nevertheless, on average, you're going to burn much more calories during endurance training than you will during strength training. And as I note down here, I'll just cover this real quickly. EPOC is really the demand of recovery after a bout of exercise. Some people will say that another benefit to strength training is that this recovery demand is greater afterward, and therefore your body burns more calories recovering. That might be true to some degree, but the difference between what the actual calories burned for recovery are between endurance training and strength training tend to be so small that it's probably more worth ignoring than anything else. So with that said, I don't necessarily consider that a unique benefit to strength training. Second rationale for why you might look to do endurance training or cardio for fat loss is an increase in lipolytic enzyme production, which are just the enzymes that your body uses to burn fat. So say, for instance, you compared two people. One is very high aerobically trained, good endurance. One is very low aerobically trained, very bad endurance. And you had them run a 5K, let's say, for time. The person who has high aerobic fitness will probably use something like 50% fat, 50% carbs as their fuel during exercise. The untrained, aerobically trained, specifically person, will use something like 100% of fuel from carbohydrates. The reason for that is that one of the primary adaptations to endurance training is an increase in these lipolytic enzyme productions, because once your carbohydrate stores run out, that's when a sense of true physical fatigue tends to set in. In endurance sport, it's often referred to as hitting the wall, because there will just be this moment where you felt energized and then you just crash. You feel like your legs just don't have enough gas in them anymore. If your body is better at using fats for fuel, and it will use fats for fuel earlier on in exercise, and those carb stores can be prolonged and last longer, and therefore fatigue is pushed off to a longer away. Some have postulated that this effect might carry over to yourself at rest. And so when you're in that calorie deficit, just sitting on the couch, your body might be more able to use fats for fuel during that time. So again, the two primary benefits to cardiovascular training for fat loss are: one, you'll burn more calories during the exercise itself, and two, as you adapt to cardiovascular training, your body will be better able to use fat for fuel during exercise for sure, and likely at rest as well. So going back to the original paper that I talked about before, and this will be linked down below if you're interested, they looked at resistance training or strength training, aerobic training or cardio, or concurrent training, which is doing both within the same program, on fat loss and body composition. So I believe these 5 bullet points really do summarize the main findings of the paper quite well. So aerobic training or cardio led to the greatest total weight loss. And I should note that all subjects that were studied in here were in a calorie deficit. So they were within those conditions that would promote weight loss of some kind. Aerobic training, cardio, led to the greatest total weight loss. Fat loss from aerobic training or cardio was greater than strength training. And that also is partially a function of just being more weight loss total. However, muscle retention during that calorie deficit was greater in strength training than it was during aerobic training or cardio. So when you compare the strength training versus the cardio groups, the strength training group held on to more muscle but lost less fat, whereas the cardio group, who were doing only cardio, lost more muscle, or lost some muscle at least, and had greater fat loss and weight loss in general. However, fat loss was similar between the cardio and the both groups, the concurrent group who did both kinds of training, as well as muscle retention was similar between the strength training group and the concurrent group, so those who are doing both. So in other words, concurrent training or doing both cardio and strength training within the same program led to the greatest fat loss and muscle retention, so really the best of both worlds. And then, as I say here, bottom line, concurrent training gave the best overall benefit. And then really the practical take home that I wanted to provide you with from this study is really the same as what the findings are. You do some kind of strength training and cardio within your program, ideally for the rest of your life. There are 1,000 other reasons why I can list why this would also be sort of your best bet for other health outcomes, but for the purposes of fat loss and body composition, it also does seem to be your best bet. This probably doesn't mean you need to have a perfectly 50-50 split of focus between strength training and endurance training. You could do 30% endurance, 70% strength, or vice versa. That's totally up to you, but some degree of endurance training and some degree of strength training within your program, again, ideally for the rest of your life, is probably going to be your best bet. And with that said, that concludes everything that I had to provide you in this video. Hope you found that somewhat helpful, interesting, or somewhere between, and I will see you next time. Thanks for being here.